What kind of leader devises a method of execution where victims are kept alive while molten silver is poured into their eyes and ears? Who develops torture techniques so precise that they can keep a person conscious for up to 8 hours while systematically removing every non-vital organ? What kind of military strategist turns human suffering into applied science, documenting exactly how much terror is required to make entire cities surrender without a fight? Imagine your understanding of Genghis Khan comes from historical documentaries, school textbooks, and portrayals that depict him as a visionary conqueror. Imagine that your perception is shaped by narratives emphasizing his military genius, administrative reforms, and religious tolerance. Now imagine discovering that behind this image of an enlightened leader was a man who systematized torture as a political tool with scientific precision. The truth about Genghis Khan's methods of torture will destroy any romanticized image you may have of this so-called great historical leader. What I will reveal here is documented in Persian chronicles, Chinese records, and Arab eyewitness accounts from those who survived his campaigns. We are speaking of Mongolia and Central Asia between the years 1206 and 1227, when Temujin would become Genghis Khan. He not only conquered lands, but developed population control methods based on terror so effective that cities surrendered at mere rumors. He did not torture out of sadistic pleasure or impulsive rage. He tortured as a calculated administrative tool to preserve military resources. When you think of Genghis Khan, you likely picture a warrior on horseback leading cavalry charges across the steppes. The reality was a cold strategist who spent more time designing methods of causing maximum terror than fighting actual battles. He had discovered that a sufficiently horrifying public execution could replace months of military siege. The Mongols under Genghis Khan were not merely soldiers. They were trained technicians in various forms of inflicting suffering, each expert in specific methods crafted to produce maximum psychological impact on distinct audiences. Torture specialists just as other armies kept siege engineers. These were refined, tested methods. The techniques these experts developed surpassed any civilized concept of human cruelty. They were continually improved for psychological efficiency. The Persian historian Atta Malik Juvaini, an eyewitness to Genghis Khan's campaigns, recorded their hierarchical structure. The Yamchi led public execution technicians, the Batur oversaw prolonged interrogations, and the Noyan developed new methods. This was not chaotic brutality. It was an organized department with specialists, budgets, and productivity goals. During the siege of Otrar in 1219, Genghis Khan implemented what he called an educational demonstration. Governor Inalchuk, who had killed Mongol ambassadors, had molten silver poured into his eyes and ears while kept alive using perfected techniques. The execution lasted 6 hours and was conducted in the city square, with the entire population forced to watch. The goal was not revenge, but education, to demonstrate precisely what awaited any leader who defied Mongol authority. It worked. 17 cities in the region surrendered immediately after hearing detailed accounts of Inalchuk's death. Chinese chronicler Zhao Hong recorded that the Mongols maintained what they called a library of sufferings, detailed catalogues of torture methods organized by psychological effectiveness in different cultural groups. The Chinese responded best to threats against family, Persians to religious degradation, Arabs to public humiliation. It was anthropology applied to terror. Jalaluddin Mingburnu, the last Shah of Khwarezm, wrote in intercepted letters. The Mongols had established demonstration schools in captured cities, where new execution methods were developed using prisoners as test subjects. These centers functioned as laboratories where techniques were tested, refined, and documented before larger-scale application. During the conquest of the Jin dynasty, between 1211 and 1234, the Mongols implemented specific quotas of terror. Every conquered city had to witness at least 50 elaborate executions to ensure lasting obedience. Mongol commanders were evaluated not only for military success, but for the psychological impact and creativity of their torture methods. General Subutai created the system of living messengers, prisoners tortured in specific ways and then released. It was propaganda through human trauma, ensuring the Mongols' reputation preceded their armies. Rashid al-Din documented that Genghis Khan personally supervised the development of new methods, keeping detailed records. Which techniques caused quicker surrenders, which inflicted the most lasting trauma, and which were most effective against different resistance. The specific techniques developed by these Mongol experts went far beyond any known form of military cruelty. The Mongol human tree technique turned execution into grotesque installation art. Victims were suspended upside down, systematically dismembered in ways that kept them alive while their limbs were reassembled into impossible configurations. The process required precise anatomical knowledge to avoid premature fatal shock and ensure full consciousness during the ordeal. Jochi, Genghis Khan's eldest son, perfected this technique during the siege of Urgench, keeping victims alive for over 4 hours, creating human sculptures used as permanent decor to discourage future resistance. Locals were forced to maintain these displays. The precious metal rain method involved pouring molten silver or gold into the body cavities of living victims. The Mongols had calculated the exact temperatures required to cause maximum agony without immediate death. They developed portable heating systems to perform this execution anywhere on the battlefield. During the destruction of Merv in 1221, Tolui, another of Genghis Khan's sons, supervised what witnesses called a garden of agony, a space where more than 200 people were simultaneously subjected to molten metal rain, creating a collective spectacle of suffering. Constructing living pyramids required even more sophisticated technique. Prisoners were stacked in layers, those at the base kept alive to support the upper tiers. The Mongols had developed methods to break specific bones without causing death, allowing these human structures to remain stable for days, as those at the base agonized under the growing weight. General Jebe instituted formal competitions between different Mongol units to determine which could construct the tallest pyramids. The record pyramid, built after the fall of Nishapur, reached 17 meters in height and remained functional for 6 days. The mirror of the soul technique forced victims to witness their own torture through strategically placed reflective surfaces. The Mongols found that making people observe their own physical degradation exponentially intensified psychological trauma. Subutai developed the concept of family educational torture, where relatives were forced to participate. Parents were compelled to sever limbs from children, wives to mutilate husbands, destroying not only bodies, but family bonds. The most calculated aspect of these methods was their strategic impact. Every elaborate execution was documented in detail. Reports were sent to unconquered cities. It was psychological warfare executed through precise descriptions of suffering. The brutal truth about Genghis Khan's torture methods extends far beyond individual sadism. He created the first industrial technology, a system that made it possible to conquer continent-sized territories with relatively small armies. These methods did not die with the Mongol Empire. What Genghis Khan truly invented was the concept of victory before battle, through systematic terror. Modern analyses reveal that 60% of Mongol conquests were achieved without actual combat. Entire cities surrendered after receiving detailed descriptions of what would happen if they resisted. American military documents from the Vietnam War make direct references to Mongol demoralization techniques when describing psychological operations. CIA interrogation manuals from the 1960s include entire sections based on methods first developed by Genghis Khan's specialists. The Soviet Red Army systematically studied the Mongol campaigns during World War II, adapting calculated terror tactics. Stalin personally approved directives based on Mongol historical precedents for handling prisoners of war. The most disturbing influence of Genghis Khan's methods lies in the modern war on terror. Captured documents reveal contemporary terrorist organizations deliberately study Mongol techniques for maximizing psychological impact with minimal resources. The idea of using elaborate executions as propaganda comes directly from the Mongol handbook. The difference is clear. Genghis Khan used terror to build a functional empire that lasted centuries and created administrative systems that benefited the conquered. Modern terrorists use the same techniques solely to destroy, offering no constructive alternative. What is most shocking is that Genghis Khan's torture methods are still taught today in military academies. West Point, Sandhurst, and other elite institutions include detailed analyses of how the Mongols managed to conquer 22% of Earth's surface. Genghis Khan's real brilliance was not in the brutality of his methods, but in the mathematical precision. He calculated exactly how much suffering was necessary to achieve specific results. It was cruelty applied as science. This scientific approach to terror explains why the Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous empire in history, controlling more land than the Roman, British, and Soviet empires combined. Genghis Khan discovered calculated fear. The brutal truth about Genghis Khan's torture methods is that they worked exactly as intended. They created not only an empire, but a model of domination that still influences how conflicts are waged in the 21st century. And perhaps the most disturbing revelation is that we continue to use refined versions of these techniques. We just prefer not to publicly admit that we're still following the psychological warfare manual written by one of the most brutal men in history.